Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
In this lecture, we're going to look at the relations between science, technology, and human rights. Science and technology have played a key role in improving productivity in agriculture, industry, and also in some services. Science and technology also played an important role in the production of war equipment and weapons during the 20th century. It is generally said that the First World War was the chemists' war, as the chemists developed poisonous gas to be used in the warfare. The Second World War was the physicists' war, as the physicists developed the atom bomb. The next war, if ever it's going to be fought, it will be the biologists' war, as the biologists today have the capacity to develop lethal bacteria and viruses that can be released into the population of the enemy countries. And it is a biologist's warfare. In fact, this has already been used in some contexts. In my earlier lecture, I mentioned that certain artifacts have direct political function. Example I gave was that of atom bomb. We all know that the worst human tragedy involving death of a large number of innocent people, men, women, and children, was a result of the atom bombs that were dropped on Japanese cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, during the Second World War. It is an unprecedented violation of human rights, right to live. Human right to live in this world, it is an inalienable right. Everybody has a right to live in the world. And this was the kind of right that was violated by the atom bombs, or those who dropped the atom bombs on these innocent people. The effect of the atom bombs are being felt even now in terms of human emotions, in terms of the loss that people really experience, in terms of the death of people in their families in earlier generations, and what it has done to the environment. The atom bomb is an artifact produced by human actors. In fact, the decision to develop a nuclear bomb was a political decision based on the recommendations of a group of scientists to the then President of the USA. Einstein's work provided scientific knowledge underlying the construction of the bomb. Okay. To implement the decision, over 600 scientists and engineers worked as a team to build the atomic bomb. In other words, scientists and technologists were part of the project right from the conception of the project to producing the deliverable atom bomb. So, weapons of destruction reaction. The other worst kind of violation of right to live was Holocaust unleashed by Hitler. He killed millions of Jews, sending innocent men, women belonging to Jewish religion into gas chambers. People who have nothing to do, or people who are innocent, people who have not committed any crime, they were all sent to gas chambers. Basically, Hitler believed that Jewish race should be eliminated from the face of the earth. So these human tragedies of unprecedented scale elicited reaction from people from all countries. Scientists themselves were shocked by the effect of the atom bomb, that they began a movement to make science more responsible and ethical. The Pugwash movement was initiated by famous scientists like Einstein, who was also a part of the decision to make the atom bomb to contain Hitler, who they thought would be making a bomb. The Russell-Einstein Manifesto was released on July 9, 1955. The manifesto called for a conference of scientists to assess the dangers of weapons of mass destruction. Of course, those days, the only weapons of mass destruction were nuclear weapons. And today we have biological weapons. Today we have nuclear bombs, we have biological weapons, and so on. We have several carriers of this kind of weapons. We have warships, we have which carry aircrafts, which can drop them, which aircrafts can drop these bombs wherever they want, and so on. It is in this context the United Nations people, and they wanted to contain the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction because they posed a threat to humanity as a whole. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights remains a relevant document today, as it was on the day in 1948. On the day it was proclaimed in 1948, and it was adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations. The extraordinary vision and resolve of the drafters produced a document that for the first time articulated the rights and freedoms to which every human being is equally and inalienably entitled. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights concerns were expressed regarding human rights in the context of increasing threats of war, especially during the Cold War era. The Declaration, Article number 1, states all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in the spirit of brotherhood. Article number 2 says, everyone is entitled to all rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, or political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Furthermore, no distinction shall be made on the basis of political or jurisdictional or international status of the country or territory to which a person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-governing, or under any other limitation of sovereignty. Now, what do we mean by human rights? See, one can distinguish over time. People have started looking at what these human rights are. We can now look at three classes of human rights. One, the inalienable rights. No matter in which society one lives, he or she is entitled to right to life. That is, everybody on this earth is entitled to life. Nobody can take away one's life. Nobody can take away others' life. And be constitutionally guaranteed rights, that every country is, in today's context, every country is governed by a constitution, and each country's constitution recognizes certain rights as human rights in that particular context. That is, these are constitutionally guaranteed rights. For example, Constitution of India guarantees the right for free speech, for free thinking, and according to the Constitution, everybody is equal before the law, right? Whether, irrespective of whether one is a man or a woman, one belongs to a particular caste or race, all are equal before law. Constitutions also guarantee certain other kinds of right. For example, the Constitution of America guarantees that the private property is a sacred thing, and they should be respected. Everybody should respect private property, and it's a right that is guaranteed by Constitution. Nobody can violate or infringe upon right to property. Whereas the Soviet Union, which became a socialist country in 1917, their constitution said the Soviet Union, after revolution, will not recognize private property as a right. Nobody is entitled to private property in socialist country. The property is owned by the state. So the country's constitutions can differ in terms of what right has to be guaranteed to its citizens, and this can vary. Then third kind of rights is desirable rights but cannot be enforced. For example, we say desirable right. Freedom of press is a desirable right, but this cannot be enforced. through courts of law. Whereas constitutionally guaranteed rights and can be enforced through courts of law. If there is a violation of a right guaranteed by Constitution, one can go to court and seek justice. As said, Article number 3, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Article 4 says, no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all forms. Article 5 says, no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruelty or inhuman, degrading treatment or punishment. Then, see, we also have advances in sciences. Sciences have been making enormous progress, especially biology. The advances in biological sciences had implications for human rights. So, it is in this context, there was a universal declaration on bioethics and human rights. This was warranted by the fact that molecular biology developed techniques of transferring genetic material from one organism to another. Biology also developed techniques to identify, map the genes on the genome of human beings, and also found out that which genes are responsible for example, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and they also located the genes on a particular chromosomes. Now, this knowledge has gone to this extent, and if one looks at human DNA, one can see the propensity of a human being for diseases like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and so on. So in this context, the Universal Declaration on Bioethics was made by the United Nations. In October 2005, the General Conference of the UNESCO adopted by acclamation the Universal Declaration of Bioethics and Human Rights. For the first time in the history of bioethics, member states committed themselves and the international community to respect and apply the fundamental principles of bioethics set forth within a single text. What are the articles of this bioethics? Some of the important articles I would like to mention to you. One is Article 3, Human Dignity and Human Rights. Human dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms ought to be fully respected. As I said, whether they are constitutionally guaranteed rights, whether they are inalienable rights, they have to be respected by everybody. The interests and welfare of the individual should have priority over the sole interests of science or society. That is, individuals' rights must be respected. They should have priority over the sole interests of science or industry and society at large. Article 4 says benefit and harm. In applying advancing scientific knowledge, medical practice, and associated technologies, direct and indirect benefits to patients, research participants, and other affected individuals should be maximized, and any possible harm to such individuals should be minimized. So this happens, for example, I will give you some examples in a few minutes, but the concern of this article is to extend benefits to individuals and not harm the individuals in any way. Article 5, Autonomy and Individual Responsibility. The autonomy of persons to make decisions while taking responsibility for those decisions and respecting the autonomy of others is to be respected. For persons who are not capable of exercising autonomy, special measures are to be taken to protect their rights and interests. Article 6, any preventive or diagnostic or therapeutic medical intervention is only to be carried out with the prior free informed consent of the person concerned based on adequate information. The consent should, where appropriate, be expressed and may be withdrawn by the person concerned at any time and for any reason without a disadvantage or prejudice. then scientific research should only be carried out with the prior free, express and informed consent of the person concerned. The information should be adequate, provided in a comprehensible form, and should include modalities for withdrawal of the consent. Consent may be withdrawn by the person concerned at any time for any reason without disadvantage or prejudice, which I mentioned just now. Exceptions to this principle should be made only in accordance with ethical and legal standards adopted by the states, consistent with the principles and provisions set out in the Declaration, in particular Article 27 and international human rights law. Okay, in appropriate cases of research carried out on a group of persons or a community, additional agreements of the legal representatives of the group or community concerned may be sought. In no case should a collective community agreement or the consent of a community leader or other authority substitute for individuals' informed consent. Okay, I just mentioned this. Okay, I mentioned this. Article 8, respect for human vulnerability and personal integrity in applying and advancing scientific knowledge, medical practice, and associated technologies. Human vulnerability should be taken into account. Individuals and groups' special vulnerability should be protected and the personal integrity of such individuals respected. Then Article 9, privacy and confidentiality. The privacy of the persons concerned and the confidentiality of their personal information should be respected. To the greatest extent possible, such information should not be used or disclosed for purposes other than those for which it was collected or consented to, consistent with international law, in particular international human rights law. Article 15, sharing of benefits. Benefits resulting from any scientific research and applications should be shared with society as a whole and within the international community, in particular with developing countries. In giving effect to this principle, benefits may take the form as follows. Special and sustainable assistance to and acknowledgement of the persons and groups that have taken part in research, access to quality health care, provision of new diagnostic and therapeutic modalities or products stemming from research. So Article 15 has these clauses: D, support for public health services; E, access to scientific and technological knowledge; capacity building facilities for research purposes; other forms of benefit consistent with the principles set out in this declaration. Benefit should not constitute improper inducements to participants to participate in research. The impact of life sciences on future generations, including their genetic constitution, should be given due regard. Article 17, protection of the environment, biosphere and biodiversity. Due regard is to be given to the interconnection between human beings and other forms of life, to the importance of appropriate access and utilization of biological and genetic resources, to respect traditional knowledge, and to the role of human beings in the protection of the environment, the biosphere and biodiversity. Okay, let me give you some examples. I've been reading out these articles. So what it means is that, as I said, molecular biology has advanced to such an extent that now we are able to find out where the genes responsible for Alzheimer's disease, for Parkinson's disease are located, and this knowledge is available with us. Sometimes, many times, people are asked to give their blood samples for medical research. They are asked to participate in research clinical trials. These are important developments that have occurred so far. It is in this context that ethical principles become important. For example, let me say, all this when the hospital or when a group of scientists go to an individual or a community and say that we are doing this research, we would like to collect blood samples of your community members, then what should it be based on? The scientist must tell them what is the purpose of this kind of study, and they should take prior informed consent from every individual who is going to participate in this research and donate his blood or her blood for scientific investigations. It could be blood, it could be some body tissue, right, whatever part of the body. Now, it is in this context, prior informed consent is extremely important. No scientist, no group of scientists can take blood samples or tissues from human bodies without informing the person from whom they are taking the blood. Or so it is prior informed consent is this. For example, we also have this practice whenever our close kin is admitted to hospital and he or she has to undergo surgery, doctor will take a consent form from us that we are giving consent for particular procedure, and doctors be allowed to carry out this procedure. Now, prior informed consent is extremely important point. And then we also have this benefit sharing. I was talking to you. Benefit sharing means, okay, yeah. Then the other article number 9 says, before I go to benefit sharing, let me talk about privacy and confidentiality, that all scientists or doctors, whenever they collect information from individuals, must keep it as confidential information. For example, if the doctors find that a person has, let's say, Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease, he should not divulge it to other third parties. He must inform the patient or his close kin. He should not divulge this to third party. That means other than the doctor and the patient, others should not know this, right? So this, because if it is informed to others, the individuals may have a problem in the sense that their life can be affected because of this information that is being shared by the doctor. The second, I said, the sharing of benefits. See, for example, sometimes whenever scientists carry out study by taking blood samples or by taking tissues from people who are hospitalized, and it may lead to some innovations. The tissue may be used to produce some antibodies. Tissues may be used for developing certain new drugs and provide basis for development of new drugs. Now, this means that you are taking material from a human being, and when you do that, you must tell him that we are going to use this for this research purpose. If there are benefits arising out of this, we are going to share with you, right? This is what should be done whenever scientists ask people to participate in a research which may lead to certain inventions or innovations. Yeah. Okay. For example, it's a practice now. We all go to hospitals, give our blood samples for various tests. These hospitals may store them for future research, right? This is not correct. They must take permission from the persons who give the blood for blood samples that the hospital may like to use the remaining blood sample for further investigation. They cannot do this without informing the patient. Okay, so it must be informed to the patients or persons who donate blood or other parts of the body to people, to the doctors or scientists, and they must really, if the benefit accrues from this such donation, the individuals must be compensated for. They also must be allowed to share the benefits. So this happens, for example, when we talk of, especially in the case of certain crops and plants. I'll give an example. In Kerala, there is one tribe, Kani tribe, which they have to climb the hills, steep hills, for collecting the firewood food and so on. And they consume a particular leaf, Arogyapacha leaf, which gives them enormous stamina. Once a scientist from CSIR went to this Kani tribe and took them to the hills for collecting some information on medicinal plants. And the persons who accompanied, persons belonging to tribal community who accompanied the scientists, they never got tired. Scientists got surprised. How come you are not tired? We all are tired by climbing this. They said, we take this leaf, which gives us enormous stamina. Then the CSR scientists took the leaf to the laboratory and tested, found out that there is a molecule which really gives this kind of stamina. Then they did research and commercialized this molecule. And when the benefits started flowing in after commercializing this, they started sharing this with this community in Kerala. This is one example. This is what we mean by access and benefit sharing. One should be able to access the material, and any benefit that arises from the access must be shared with the communities or individuals from which we procure this material. That's what access to scientific and technological knowledge must be given. And this sharing can be in various ways. If it is a community knowledge, for example, in this case, Arogyapacha case, it's a community knowledge, then the community must be compensated. So a school may be built, a hospital may be created there, and so on. Various ways in which the benefit can be shared and benefit can accrue to every member of the community. Article 17 argues is about protection of environment, biosphere, and biodiversity. Bioethics means that, as I said as an example, how do we protect biodiversity? Biodiversity is an important kind of a resource that we have on this earth. Diversity of crops, diversity within a crop, this is what keeps us going. This is what provides us life supporting systems. For example, brinjal, which has become a debatable plant, which was supposed to be genetically modified, which the government said no to that genetic modification or commercial release of genetically modified brinjal. So brinjal has a variety, 200 varieties. Rice has about 33,000 varieties, right? So this is what we mean by diversity. So diversity ensures food security, right? If you depend on only one particular crop, one particular variety of rice, one particular hybrid rice, then your food security is in jeopardy or danger. So I think there's a need to protect this kind of diversity that we have, and for posterity, right? Article 18 says professionalism, honesty, integrity, and transparency in decision making should be promoted. In particular, declarations of all conflicts of interest and appropriate sharing of knowledge. Every endeavor should be made to use the best available scientific knowledge and methodology in addressing and periodically reviewing bioethical issues. Persons and professionals concerned and society as a whole should be engaged in dialogue on a regular basis. Opportunities for informed, pluralistic public debate seeking the expression of all relevant opinions should be promoted. Article 19 is ethics committees. The Declaration on Bioethics says independent, multidisciplinary, pluralistic ethics committee should be established, promoted and supported at the appropriate level in order to assess the relevant ethical, legal, scientific and social issues related to research projects involving human beings, provide advice on ethical problems in clinical settings, assess scientific and technological developments, formulate recommendations and contribute to the preparation of guidelines on issues within the scope of the declaration. Then foster debate, education and public awareness and engagement in bioethics. Basically what it means is any research that we do, any kind of a product that we make which involves use of human beings must be done ethically, must be done according to principles of ethics. This includes privacy of the individual, confidentiality of the information that you collect from individuals, ensuring the dignity of the individuals, and then you also must make sure that you take a prior informed consent before we actually ask them to participate in research by donating their blood samples and so on. And third, benefit sharing. If out of your research some products come out or some processes come out, the gains of such innovations must be shared with people who have contributed to the research project. It also talks of transnational practices. States, public and private institutions, and professionals associated with the transnational activities should endeavor to ensure that any activity within the scope of this declaration, undertaken, funded, or otherwise pursued in whole or in part in different states, is consistent with the principles set out in the declaration. That is, they must follow ethical principles even in transnational practices. Normally what happens is, whenever there is an international project which involves scientists from different countries, they must they must do the research on the basis of these ethical principles, right? They must really they must respect individuals from whom they are going to collect samples, whether it is Africans, Asians, or other members from other countries. So they must really look at these issues. For example, when you do clinical trials, sometimes some drugs are tried out on human populations, human volunteers, without informing them what they are using, what drug they are trying to use. This is unethical. The participants must be told that a particular drug is being tested, and for volunteering to participate in the test, the persons, their prior informed consent must be taken, and see that their dignity is ensured, the confidentiality is maintained, and if there is harm to the individuals, they must be really compensated. So we hear that a lot of clinical trials take place without following this kind of procedures, which is not ethical. As I said, the molecular biology advances, the advances that were taken place in molecular biology are based on the Watson and Crick discovery that the human DNA has a double helical structure, and the molecular biology enabled us to understand the life processes at molecular level, that is at the level of genes, and also enabled us to intervene at the level of genes. That is, we are able to now transfer genes from one organism to another. We are able to, I said we have already identified on which chromosomes of human body genes responsible for Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease are located. And we know if you have this knowledge, then interventions take place. For example, can we replace the Alzheimer's disease causing genes from a human body, from a person's genome? So this is a question. For example, can we remove or alter the genes that cause Parkinson's disease in a human being? This is what we mean interventions. These are done by biotechnological interventions. Biotechnology is offshoot of our understanding of life at molecular level. For example, genetic engineering is an example of intervention at molecular level. For example, when you talk of Bt cotton plant, a cotton plant which is attacked by pests was, how do we sort of stop pest attacks on cotton plants? Scientists thought if you can enable the plant itself to kill the pests, we don't have to use pesticides. Then they transferred a gene which is a toxic protein from a bacterium called Bacillus thuringiensis into cotton plant, and this gene located in the cotton plant is supposed to fight the pests. If the pests eat the plant, they die. So that is, you are equipping the plant itself to kill the pests, right? Instead of using pesticides. This is an example of how genetic engineering can be used to transfer genes from one organism to another across taxonomic groups, in the sense between plants and animals, but within animals from one species to another species. So this is the logic of understanding life processes at molecular level and intervening at the molecular level. And also in the case of human beings, we are now talking of gene therapy, in the sense how do we really address the questions of Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease or some other diseases which are affecting the human populations, right? Then what do we mean by genomics? Genomics is science of genes, mapping the genome, identifying the genes on different chromosomes of the organisms, identifying the functions of the genes, functional genomics. I just now mentioned that scientists have succeeded in identifying the location of genes which are responsible for Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease on the chromosomes, on a particular chromosome in a human body. That's what we call mapping the genes, their location and also functions, right? What are the functions of genes? For example, in the case of human beings, we would like to find out what are the genes that control, for example, skin color. What are the genes that control, for example, your eye color of the eyes? What are the genes that control propensity to diabetes in a particular individual? So these are the ways in which you can identify functions of genes. This is what we mean by functional genomics. And if you identify the functions of genes, you can also intervene in this. Genomes of organisms, for example, if you see, there are 3 model organisms in biology. One is E. coli, a bacterium. The idea is if you understand the genome of E. coli, you understand the genome of 99% of all bacteria. Then another model organism is Drosophila melanogaster, or fruit fly. It's an insect, very, very tiny insect. We must have seen these insects fly on the fruit. Sometimes when fruit is kept uncovered at homes. If you understand the genome of fruit fly, that Drosophila melanogaster, you understand the genome of almost all insects in the world. Then third model plant is Arabidopsis thaliana. Arabidopsis thaliana is a plant which has a short life cycle of 12 weeks. And if you understand the genome of Arabidopsis, then you understand the genome of almost all plants, 99% plants. So scientists have been trying to map the genomes of crop plants such as wheat and rice, and they've already been mapped. In the sense, we know where the genes responsible for yield are located on which chromosomes, where the genes responsible for, let's say, drought tolerance are located, and how many genes control this drought tolerance. These are now being studied and understood by scientists, and it's at that level we are trying to operate. I mentioned 3 model organisms which are used in biology to understand the genome of various taxonomic groups in animal world and plant world, right? So I said Arabidopsis thaliana is an important model plant to understand the genome of all plants. Earlier, over 600 scientists worked on unraveling the genome of this plant, and of course today gene mapping has become much faster and relatively easier. Then we also have this human genome. People have identified, or people have mapped human genome. That was based on a project, mapping of genes and identifying functions of genes to intervene. In the case of human beings, there was a human genome project initiated by the US in 1991. Human genome mapped total, all the human genome was mapped in 2004. The number of genes, human being has 35,000 genes distributed over 23 pairs of chromosomes and one pair of sex chromosomes. See, as I said, scientists have already identified where the genes responsible for Alzheimer's disease occur. They found out Alzheimer's genes occur on chromosome number 10 and 18. That is, these genes causing Alzheimer's disease, we know where exactly they are located on which chromosomes of human in the human beings. Now you have this knowledge, and is it possible to intervene and perhaps change the genes is a question. It's a very, very complex question. And the Human Genome Project also found that human beings share the genome to the extent of 99.9%. The 0.1% difference among people accounts for the variation in physical appearance and other phenotypic features, like how do we look, or in the shape of the face and other things, right? What does knowledge of human genome tell us? One, it helps us in identifying or locating the genes responsible for certain diseases like Alzheimer's in terms of which chromosome they are located. Second kind of knowledge it gives us, resistance against resistance against diseases. See, members of some communities have resistance against some diseases conferred by genes. See, if you look at human population across the world, we say Indian population is susceptible for diabetes and heart problems, whereas perhaps some people in some other country are susceptible for some kind of cancers, right? So, susceptibility to diseases, members of some communities are susceptible to some diseases created by the genes or controlled by the genes. Then some people are having resistance against some diseases. Some people are susceptible for diseases. But as I said, Indians are supposed to be susceptible for diabetes and heart conditions, and some others are susceptible for, some people in some other countries are susceptible for cancers of different kinds, and perhaps they are susceptible for other chronic diseases. Resistance means some members of the communities have resistance against some diseases. That is, maybe some people in some countries have resistance against cancer. We don't know, that has to be investigated. But I will give an example from our animal kingdom. See, in India we have a large number of goats and sheep which are Indian native breeds. And these are supposed to be having resistance against some diseases. Whereas the sheep and goats which are reared in other countries like, for example, Europe and US, they are susceptible for some kind of diseases. The question is, can you transfer genes from the Indian sheep and goats to the sheep and goats in Europe and US, which can acquire this resistance against diseases? So this kind of studies are being done, and see, today, if you look at our population, goats and sheep, nobody takes care of them. They are grazing all over the place, and we really hear very few cases of diseases among these population of sheep and goat, and people found out they have resistance against some diseases. Now these features are source of technological interventions. That is, we would like to transfer genes from populations which have resistance against a particular disease to those populations which are susceptible to that disease. This is what is called interventions or genetic at the level of genes. Then how does this Human Genome Project and its results and its findings affect human rights or promote human rights? See, use of human genetic material for the development of proprietary technologies raises the question of human rights. That is, how can anybody use the genetic material that's a shared heritage to develop proprietary technologies protected by the IPRs? See, for example, our human bodies evolved over time. Our human bodies have been taken care by the communities over time. Our human bodies were taken care of by the families over generations. And this is, in a sense, community participated in keeping, in protecting the human bodies and giving them health care, giving them nutrition and so on. But if somebody wants to use genetic material from, let's say, African population to develop a particular intervention, now how should this kind of a thing, how this should be done, right? So can they go on directly talk to the individual and say that we're going to do this investigation, we're going to find out whether we can produce a process or a product by using the samples from your body, right? So this is a question which one has to really address. This involves ethical questions. This involves ethical issues. What rights individuals and communities have in their genetic material? What rights individuals and communities have when the genetic material is used for the technological development? See, I'll give you an example. Sometime back in the US, a cancer patient was admitted to hospital, and a doctor did a surgery. I think it was brain cancer, and this tissue that he got from the cancerous tissue, he wanted to use it for some tests and also develop some kind of antibodies. Now, this was done without the knowledge of the person who was suffering from the disease. Now, can this be done, right? It is unethical. What are the proprietary products today? We're talking of cloned genes, development of antibodies by using genetic material, genetic products arising out of the stem cell research or organs. See, cloning genes means what? See, for example, I said Bt cotton, Bt gene is a cloned gene from Bacillus thuringiensis. Some company identified the gene and mapped it and then found out the structure of the gene. Structure consists of the sequence of nucleic acids like ATGC, and they synthesized this. That's what we mean by cloning the gene. And this has become proprietary product of the company. Now, Bt gene today is a proprietary product of Monsanto company, which has really did obtain this clone by locating the gene in Bacillus thuringiensis. I said development of antibodies using genetic material. As I gave the example of using human tissue to develop genetic material. And if you develop antibodies from this, that becomes commercial products. Then you sell them in the market and make profit, without the person who gave this tissue ever knowing that the genetic material from his body was used to produce a particular product or a drug, right? So today we also talk of stem cell research. That is, stem cell research means that you can produce organs, full-grown organs from certain cells of the body. For example, women's umbilical cord provides enormous possibilities of developing stem cells and then producing entire organs. That is, human organs can be cultured, grown by using cells that have potential to produce these organs. Now, if you do this, for example, if you take this kind of material from, let's suppose, a lot of women give birth to children in hospitals, and then hospitals normally during the process of delivery, they also use cut the umbilical cord, and earlier it was seen as some waste material, but today it is seen as a source of stem cells. So today, with today's knowledge, what should the hospital tell the person, the lady who delivers a child, whether or not they're going to use the umbilical cord for stem cell research? I think they should take prior informed consent, and also any kind of gains that come out of this stem cell research must be shared with persons who gave this material, umbilical cord, for example. Ethical, legal, social issues. For example, when the Human Genome Project was initiated, right at that time, people understood that there could be ethical, legal issues arising out of these findings of the project, and they constituted a committee to look at the LC issues, ethical, legal issues. And the committee came up with several kinds of findings and recommendations. For example, human genome, by using my DNA, if somebody can say that, look, I have, or for example, let's suppose somebody goes to a doctor, and today it's possible to get one's genome examined, one's DNA examined, and the doctor tells the person, look, you have propensity to get Alzheimer's disease, or you may get Parkinson's disease. Is that right? Ethical on the part of the doctor to tell the person, look, after 5 years you will have Alzheimer's disease, after maybe 10 years you will have Parkinson's disease. This is frightening for a person who comes to know that he or she is going to have this problem after some time. It can create a lot of trauma, it can create a lot of emotional tension. That is one. The second, let us suppose somebody applies for a job in a company or an organization, and the company insists that we want your DNA fingerprint. We would like to see what are you susceptible, what kind of diseases you are susceptible to. So we say you provide a blood sample, we take a DNA fingerprint and see what kind of a profile you have, DNA. Then if the company says, look, you are going to have this disease, let's say a particular dreadful disease, because your DNA tells us that you have this propensity to have the disease or maybe after some time, then we are not going to give you a job. Because if you give you a job, then we'll have to give we have to take care of your medical care by reimbursing your medical expenses. That can lead to such a situation. Second, insurance companies may deny insuring a person, giving a life insurance to a person because that person has a propensity to get some diseases. So insurance companies can come and say, we want your DNA fingerprint, we would like to see to what diseases you are susceptible to. And then if you are susceptible to certain diseases, the insurance company may say, we are not going to insure your life, or we are going to insure your life at a very high cost, because if you develop the disease, we may have to provide insurance to take care of the treatment. And legal issues is, for example, involves when a genetic material is taken from an individual and is used by companies or research organizations, and the person is, this is done without the knowledge of the person, or the genetic material is taken from a person, is used for some commercial research. These are the issues which can lead to legal problems. That's why this UN made a declaration on LC arising out of the Human Genome Project. Universal Declaration on the Human Genome Project of the United Nations, formulated in 1997. Article 1 says, human genome underlines the fundamental unity of all the members of humanity or human family, as well as the recognition of their inherent dignity and diversity. In a symbolic sense, it is a heritage of humanity. Article 2 says, everyone has a right for their dignity and for the rights, regardless of genetic characteristics. I said, whether a person has propensity to get Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease or some other disease, he has a right to, as dignity and rights in respect of genetic characteristics. That dignity makes it imperative not to reduce individuals to their genetic characteristics and to respect diversity. That is, irrespective of what propensities, susceptibilities people have for certain diseases, one should respect and one should not stigmatize them. Article 5 says research, treatment or diagnostics affecting individual genome shall be undertaken only after rigorous and prior assessment of the potential risks pertaining thereto and in accordance with requirements of the national law. That is, if any treatment that is based on this kind of gene therapy or therapeutics arising out of genetic genomics, then you must do a rigorous assessment of whether that procedure can be followed or not, and what are the potential risks for the individual if this procedure is performed on the individual. Article 6 says, no one shall be subjected to discrimination based on genetic characteristics that is intended to infringe or has the effect of infringing human rights, fundamental freedoms and human dignity. That is what I mean when I said an insurance company cannot discriminate against a person because he or she has the potential to have a particular disease, and so the insurance company may want to deny insuring them or may insure on the basis of high premium. This is a discriminatory practice which should not be allowed. Article 10 says, no researches concerning the human genome or research applications in particular in the fields of biology, genetics and medicine should prevail over respect for human rights, fundamental freedoms and human dignity of individuals or where applicable of groups of people. That is, no research can infringe upon human rights. No research can be allowed, no research should be allowed which is going to affect human rights that are guaranteed by the constitution of a particular country or the inalienable rights that every human being on this earth has. So, 2005, the Universal Declaration of Bioethics and Human Rights of the UN. Article 1 says, this declaration addresses ethical issues related to medicine, life sciences and associated technologies as applied to human beings, taking into account their social, legal and environmental dimensions. The declaration is addressed to states. For example, if you look at the United Nations, it has several member countries. United Nations declarations are those statements of the UN which have to be ratified by individual member countries in their legislatures. Only then the countries can implement the provisions of these declarations. Okay, so all I said was one's autonomy should be respected, and this declaration provides a framework to guide the actions of individuals, groups and communities, institutions and corporations, public and private. Article 5 says individuals' autonomy should be respected to make decisions while taking decisions and respecting the autonomy of others. This also is an important principle of this article. In all cases, prior free and informed consent of the person concerned shall be taken. If the latter is not in a position to consent be obtained in a manner prescribed by law, guided by the person's best interests. So I think I read out these clauses earlier also, and it's follow-up of this Human Genome Project. All this I read out. In this lecture, I talked about how science and technology, advances in science and technology can affect human rights, how it's important to protect human rights by making appropriate legislations, by making appropriate legal interventions to protect human dignity, privacy, and human autonomy, and also to see that no human being is discriminated against because genetic information about him or her is available to people, right? So this is one of the important conclusions that one can draw, and there are attempts to intervene in this process because several attempts have been made by unscrupulous organizations to indulge in these unethical practices. For example, this is because also the fact that in this world, in unequal world, there is an asymmetry, that developing countries are source of genetic material and developed countries centers of proprietary technology development, because they take away our genetic resources from developing countries and make products out of the genetic resources and sell them back to the developing countries. This is what we mean by asymmetry. That should not be allowed. And thank you very much.